Well, if you thought after the Rose Bowl blowout Oregon was going to roll over and stop recruiting hard, you are wrong.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, and thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. So we've got lots to get to. Which young guys are going to pop? A lot of different avenues that I could go down there. And where does Dillon Gabriel fall amidst other Oregon quarterbacks from, well, we'll just say my lifetime and the ones that I've seen, all coming up on today's show. But Oregon's 2026 recruiting efforts, they're swinging for the fences here. Currently, they have the number one class in the country, which is great. They have 10 commits, which is awesome. You've got Kendra Harrison, super talented tight end, Tredarian Ball. You've got Cody Green, offensive tackle, who's a 5-star. I mean, they got a bunch of guys in there right now. And they are going big or going home is how it appears. So the biggest name that has emerged in the last couple of weeks that Oregon has been after, that Dan Lanning paid an in-person visit to himself, along with Alik Terry, Drew Maringer, and Will Stein, is Ryder Lyons, who is, by some outlets, the number one quarterback in the class of 2026. And thinking about what that would mean for Oregon's future quarterback plans is something we'll get to if he ends up choosing Oregon. But this is a program under Dan Lanning, of course, spelled with a U, not an A at the end of it, that has pulled in 3 straight top 10 classes, and they have no intention of slowing down going into next year. I mean, 2025, they have the number 5 high school recruiting class. Not bad. Not bad. Pretty darn good, as a matter of fact. But they're going after Ryder Lyons. They're going after the number 1 linebacker. They're going after Ohio State wide receiver commit Chris Henry. Lanning was down in my neck of the woods in southern Utah recently, going after Brock Harris, who's a 5-star tight end target down in the St. George area. Like, they are going after a lot of big-time names. Now, these are battles that you should have on your mind as we start to get into the offseason here, particularly looking at the 26 class, because I don't believe Oregon's going to add another player from this 2025 cycle. I think they're good. I think they're pretty set. Could they add another transfer in the spring? Yeah, maybe. Maybe if they go through spring ball and feel like the safeties are not quite enough, or maybe they feel the linebackers aren't quite all ready to contribute next year because at least one of them is going to have to. That's another subject on today's show. But the aggressive mentality that Oregon has had on the recruiting trail over the last couple of cycles just kind of looks like they're ticking it up a notch. And going after the number 1 quarterback, I think is, on the one hand, ambitious, on the one hand surprising, and if you have 3 hands, I don't know who does that, makes perfect sense. Because Oregon's long-term quarterback plans, I changed my mind mid-show here, we're going to dive into this a bit. Oregon's long-term quarterback plans depend entirely on how successful Dante Moore is. There was this photo going around Twitter yesterday as you're listening to or watching the show of Dante Moore at workouts, and he's standing in front of the entire team, and he's just got this aura about him in the photo, of course, and it looks awesome. It makes you excited. It certainly sparks the imagination. It doesn't change whether or not he's going to be a great player, but he certainly looks like a leader in that photo. Those are the sorts of nuggets we get to go on now this time of year because, well, there's no football to discuss. That doesn't mean there aren't interesting things to discuss, of course. But if he starts and thrives and exceeds my expectations this year with the Ducks, does he go to the NFL? He could. He had 1 year at UCLA. Oregon's back up this past year. This will be his 3rd year of eligibility, and boom. Well, 2nd year of eligibility that counts towards his college career, but you only need 3 seasons. One of them can be a redshirt before you go to the NFL. Maybe he decides he wants to ride the wave while it's high if he has a great season. Maybe he sticks around for 26. What does that mean for Achilles Smith Jr.? You bring in Ryder Lyons. Is that a name that, or is that a guy who comes in and starts right away as a true freshman? Or does he, like most quarterback prospects, need to sit and be developed? Who's he sitting behind and developing at that point in time? They're just continuing to give themselves options. But I think it does bring to mind for me the debate about the transfer quarterback versus the high school quarterback. And this extends to a lot of different position groups. I've been having these conversations all over the place. There is a fascinating one with a little spicy element, shall we say, on the Big Ten squad that is dropping later today on whatever feed you are listening to or watching the show on. Just check it out. I'll leave it at that. Check it out. You'll not want to miss that. But I have gotten many messages over the last couple of years from frustrated fans that Oregon doesn't recruit and develop a high school quarterback. I wonder how Dante Moore fits into that conversation, because Oregon was going to have him, and then they didn't, and then he came back. Like, does that fit the bill for bringing in a high school quarterback? But I'm always a fan of having talented players. I'm always a fan of having options at any position group, and load up with high school talent as much as you possibly can. Get those guys super ready. And if you don't feel like they are, if they aren't working out, if they get dinged up with injuries, go to the transfer portal and see if you can find guys that are available. But from the looks of it, Oregon has the ability to not go into the portal for a quarterback for the next several years. They have the ability. That's not a guarantee. Obviously, they're not doing that going into 2025. But I mean, going into 2026 as well. If they were to get Lyons, for instance, would you need a transfer at that point? Maybe Dante Moore's coming back. Maybe Austin Novosad's still around. Achilles Smith Jr. is going into his second year, and Lyons is a mega talent. Are none of those guys going to? Maybe they're not. We just saw this at Ohio State. Ohio State brought in Will Howard. You know who he took the spot of? Devin Brown, who transferred to Cal, or Aaron Noland, who I don't remember who he transferred. Those were blue chip quarterback prospects, by the way, who were kind of waiting their turn. They brought in a transfer, by the way, from Alabama to develop Julian Sayin. He's probably Ohio State starter next year. They had recruited and had guys commit to Ohio State coming out of high school. Guys like Devin Brown, who had waited for a couple of years. Guys like Aaron Noland, who was a 5-star quarterback recruit. But they're going to go with Julian Sayin, and they went with Will Howard this year. Went pretty darn well. But in each of Oregon's first 3 years, you've had a transfer at quarterback or, a returning transfer in Bo Nix. But Dante Moore technically fits that particular bill. But biggest takeaways, I think, from where the recruiting buzz is right now for Oregon is they're continuing to look at the quarterback position as, yes, you have to have guys on your roster that are capable of starting. It is not just going to be a portal instance every year where you're going to go find a guy from somewhere else, and that's just what it's going to be every single year, because not every portal class is the same. Look at this transfer portal class in 2025 of quarterbacks. There are not a lot of big names out there. There are a couple, to be sure. John Mateer going to Oklahoma, that's a pretty big move. Carson Beck to Miami, that's a big move. Malik Murphy going to Oregon State, that's a pretty significant move. Those are kind of the only proven guys that I feel really confident in as transfer quarterbacks. So I think that Oregon is, again, just fine. I don't have a super strong preference one way or the other. I just want them to be good at that position. If they were able to go out and get Lyons, that'd be a pretty good place to start. But that'd be a good place to continue what they have started, which is you've got 3 blue chip guys in the room and Luke Moga right now, who's definitely more of a project, but is a freak athlete at the quarterback position. And then going into 2026, if they're going after one of the top quarterbacks, maybe they don't end up getting Ryder Lyons, maybe they end up getting somebody else. But are both Dante Moore and Austin Novosad gone? Achilles Smith Jr., I imagine he'd still be around. Lots of options. Lots and lots and lots of options, which is just the way I like it, personally. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or hit me up on Twitter as well, or become a Locked On Ducks insider. That's an option too. You get priority access and a bunch of other perks. Link below. You can get a free 14-day trial. So speaking of recruiting, Oregon has recruited at a very high level. 3 straight top 10 classes. They have never done that before. Are we going to see more of those young guys from the last couple cycles pop this year? Yeah, we have to. And you have to know this episode brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer, can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule, that's a challenge. I know that as someone who has a tremendously busy schedule, particularly when football was in full swing, but even now when basketball is in full swing. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. Talkspace signing up is simple. You can match or switch to a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege. Enter promo code SPACE80 to match with a licensed therapist today. Go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege. Enter promo code SPACE80. Get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege. Promo code SPACE80. One name I forgot to mention earlier, by the way, if Oregon were to be able to flip Chris Henry in 2026, remember that Gatlin Bear returns from his mission in 2026. That receiver room is loaded with talent now and in the future, and I'm all about it. So, this question came from a Locked On Ducks insider who gets priority access, who says, "Hey Spencer, I hope you're having a good day. Other than Decory and Moore, Sali Apaga and Offord, who I think both will find significant snaps this upcoming season." Remember, Sali Apaga is coming off of an injury, so he's got to recover and get healthy. But if he does, I agree. Who out of the 24 and 25 signing classes do you believe get significant snaps or potentially starts? I think Breland, Lopa, and Mathuti from the 24 class. I think Finney and McNutt find rotational snaps. I think we may see more rotation with DBs this season to keep guys fresh for the length of the season. So I want to extend this question back to 23 a little bit. 25 is really hard to predict because the number of true freshmen that tend to play are few and far between. I have a hard time seeing Decory and Moore as not being one of them. Now, positionally, you're right to say Trey McNutt because he's a safety, or Naeem Offord, who I talked about on yesterday's show, as capable of moving over and playing safety. Either one of those guys, yep, could absolutely see it. Maybe Brandon Finney is that good to play on the outside, but you have to remember, these guys are coming into their first year of college ball, and Oregon has recruited top 10 classes for 2 cycles now, most of whom are still on the roster, and those guys have now spent 1 or 2 years in a weight room, in a nutrition plan, at practice, watching film with the coaches. That's a significant advantage, assuming that they are healthy. So from the 24 class, I think Aiden Breland's a guy that figures to have a role for a couple of reasons. Number one, really talented guy who we saw getting snaps in the Rose Bowl after Amarion Winston transferred out, just kind of those spot snaps here and there on the interior. And he's a more typical interior defensive lineman anyway than Amarion Winston was, but he was also behind him on the depth chart this season, or at least that's how it appeared and such. But Breland is a guy that going into his second year, I think is primed to be that Amari Washington guy who plays a role but is not a starter necessarily, but you really start to see the full potential. Because Washington, remember, just played some, and Washington didn't show what he was this year a season ago. He got into the weight room, he worked on himself in the offseason as a player, and he was awesome this year, and I think he's one of Oregon's starting defensive tackles this season. I think Breland can be on that same sort of trajectory because of the position group. I would also look at a guy like Terrence Green, who is from the 23 class, and say the opportunity is there. Now, maybe that becomes a Jericho Johnson or a Tioni Grays, a Davian Sims, one of those guys on the interior. But I think that's one of the position groups battles, the second 2 defensive tackles on the interior of the defensive line. That's one of the position groups that I'm going to be watching for when spring ball rolls around. That makes me wonder which guy's stepping up, who's claiming this role, because it kind of looks wide open. So Breland's a guy. Kingston Lopa, though, I don't know. Answer. Honestly, I don't know, because we saw him just suddenly emerge in the Big Ten championship game because Oregon was struggling to cover Tyler Warren. Now, Lopa is a guy who is really tall. He's 6'3", 6'4", in that sort of range. And the two safeties that Oregon had been trying to cover Tyler Warren with in the first half, Kobe Savage and Tysheem Johnson, I don't know. They're listed at different heights elsewhere. Neither one is really 6 feet tall. They're like 5'11" or so, 5'10", 5'11". Lopa brings some real length out there. I thought he did a really nice job. I don't know if that was just a specialty role that was concocted for him going into that game because of how involved Tyler Warren is and how important he was to that Penn State offense, because as we saw throughout the postseason as well with Penn State, they couldn't throw the ball to wide receivers. So that was a specific matchup that they had clearly gotten Lopa ready for, and I thought he did a nice job. But that's all he was doing out there. Now, that's more confidence than a lot of true freshmen get, because that's a pretty significant spot to be given a true freshman reps against the best tight end in all of college football. However, it was a specialty sequence, and I don't know if that's indicative of the fact that he's ready to suddenly take on, a starting safety role. Maybe it does. The physical traits are there. You see the potential, but is everything ready? Can he tackle the way that you need to at the safety position? Because I saw him in coverage briefly in that game, thought he looked good. Wasn't a world beater per se, had a pass interference that he, mistimed his break on the ball, and he didn't really even need to. He could have just made the tackle there. Maybe he's still got it another year of development before he becomes a significant player. But I think that's certainly an option. I see why your mind is there. I just wouldn't Sharpie that into your head as, oh, he's got to because he played in that spot. That was kind of a unique circumstance there. Another guy that I'd look at, and this is from 2 cycles ago, but Janoris Wilson is, I think, going to push to be one of Oregon's starting offensive tackles, and he's probably first guy off the bench at that spot. Like, he had a more significant role, I think, than most people realize this past year, because he was Oregon's jumbo offensive lineman, just like Josh Connerly was as a true freshman. Janoris was a redshirt freshman this past season, but that's somebody who, blue chip recruit, doesn't play a lot early, suddenly finds a role. Maybe he takes that jump, or maybe it's Alex Harkey and Isaiah World, the transfers. But if either one of those guys go down, I would imagine that Janoris Wilson is the first guy off the bench. But maybe he just beats one of them out in spring ball. I think Harkey would be the more likely of the two to get beat out, because World is a big-time NFL caliber prospect. But at the same time, it's not as if Janoris Wilson's lacking the physical traits, talent, or experience to take that next step forward in there. So that's another name that I would certainly watch. The secondary on a whole, quite frankly, is such a crapshoot. Because, yeah, you bring in the best defensive back recruiting class Oregon's ever had. Trey McNutt, Naeem Offord, and Brandon Finney. Like, other big-time programs were making pushes for these guys, and Oregon kept them, and that was really, really great to see. But it's not as if they've been completely void of recruiting high-end corners and safeties in the last couple cycles. I mean, Aaron Flowers was garnering all sorts of All-American honors when he came out of high school last year. Is he going to have a role this year? Peyton Woodyard was a blue-chip recruit that was recruited by Nick Saban at Alabama, and then he left once Saban left. I mean, is that a guy that slides in and is one of your starting safeties? I don't know. That's a guessing game in there. What's not as big of a guessing game is linebacker. So this is a 4-man guessing game, whereas the DBs are like an 8 to 10-man guessing game on which guys are going to be significant players. But there is no question that at least one of Dylan Williams, Kamar Mathuti, Braden Platt, or Jerry Mixon, who are from the 24 class, the first 3 guys are, and then Mixon's from 23, there is no question one of them has to play a significant role. Betcher coming back is huge. Devin Jackson still being there is great. But you lost Jeff Bossa, who was the second best linebacker Oregon had this year and has been a starting backer for the last 3 seasons. That's a lot of snaps to replace. Believe he played more snaps than anybody else at linebacker this year. Betcher led the team in tackles, but those were the 2 guys. So now you've lost one of those guys. Jackson probably steps up. That's great. Who fills the Devin Jackson role? That could be a battle. Who fills the Justin Jacobs role as the 4th linebacker? That could be a battle. So on the interior of the defensive line and at inside linebacker, I am 100% confident that you will see guys on the field in 2025 playing a significant role in some form or fashion who were not playing really any kind of role this year or the past year. That is about all I'm certain of right now. But spring ball is going to be fun to see how these things shake out and where guys are playing and who's getting the reps and all that sort of stuff. So let's talk about quarterbacks earlier. Let's go back to Dillon Gabriel for a moment. Where would you put him in Oregon's all-time quarterback list? A lot harder than you think. But first, why don't we talk about game time? Do you want to go to an NFL playoff game? Game time lets you do that. Do you want to go to a future college football playoff game? Game time lets you do that. Do you want to go to an Oregon basketball game? You should, and game time lets you do that too. Game time has game time picks, and that filters out the fluff to show you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters. Being there. You want to go to a game and create an experience that you can remember more than just watching it on TV. Game time is the place to do it. I have used this app, and it is phenomenal. Everything that you could want from a ticketing app, they've got it. Seat views, on-time delivery, lowest price guarantee, ease of using the software, which isn't always easy for someone like me, ironically enough. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So I got this question that came in from Aaron. In 15 years, on a scale of Joey Harrington and Justin Herbert to Anthony Brown and Dakota Prukop, how did Mariota not get in there? I don't know. Where will Dillon Gabriel fall in terms of being a positively memorable player / quarterback for Duck fans? Here's what I really hope doesn't happen. It's really easy to do because of how the last 2 seasons have gone, but I think with time it will get better. Time heals all wounds, as they say. Don't allow the last memory you have of a team or player to define what you think about them overall. So this past season was awesome, exciting, thrilling. It gave hope to a lot of people that this could be the year, but that gets taken away because of how it ended. Dillon Gabriel was fun to watch, gamer, made some big time throws, the 4th and 9 against Wisconsin, or 4th and 6, whatever. I think it was 4th and 6. It was one of those numbers out there. Big time play, bunch of great moments, played some great football, Heisman finalist. Like, he did so many great things. You know how many Heisman finalists Oregon's had at quarterback? It is now up to 4, as a matter of fact. Joey Harrington, Mariota, Bo Nix, and now Dillon Gabriel. So I will speak to quarterbacks that I have seen in my life, because I don't remember watching Joey Harrington. I'm not quite old enough for that. The first Oregon quarterback I remember watching was Kellen Clemens. That was the guy who really got me hooked on Oregon football. And then there was Dennis Dixon, Brady Leaf, and Justin Roper, and Jeremiah Masoli, and all these different guys, right? So I will keep it to the guys that I remember watching. I would say Gabriel for me. And no, he did not have his best game against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. Nobody on Oregon's offense did. But I'm not going to forget that this is a guy who we were given the nickname Big Game Dillon to throughout the season because he had earned it. I mean, in the biggest games, Ohio State, big game. Michigan, big game. Illinois, good team. I mean, he played so much great football for Oregon. And I think we'll remember that more fondly as time goes on, as we have with Bo. It helps that he's, crushing it in the NFL, or, Marcus the same way. Like, Marcus's last game was a loss in the national championship game. It's not how I remember Marcus Mariota. So I'd say for Gabriel, of the quarterbacks in my life, I'd have him behind Bo in no particular order. I'd have him behind Bo, Mariota, Dennis Dixon, Herbert. I love Darren Thomas. DG was a much more efficient player than Darren Thomas was. Both teams led Oregon to the cusp of winning a national championship and couldn't quite get over the hump. Both won conference championships with the Ducks. I've always been a huge Darren Thomas stan. So I think I have to stick with that approach and say those two guys would probably be tied for me and both just a notch above Jeremiah Masoli and Vernon Adams as well. But I don't think Gabriel should be remembered as, a mercenary type that just came in for a year and played some football. Like, I kind of feel that way about Vernon Adams, even though I loved Vernon Adams. It didn't feel the same, maybe because there wasn't a conference championship to that year, but VA was still, of course, really, really good. But I always felt in the times that I talked to Dillon Gabriel that, every guy's going to say, I love it here and I buy into it, but you kind of have to feel what how he's saying those particular responses. I always felt that he was all in on being a Duck for the 1 year that he had right away. And I appreciate that. I didn't think he was a guy that just wanted to come in, get a big NIL deal, and try to up his NFL draft stock. Like, I think he genuinely loved it, and I will remember him incredibly fondly for that. But in terms of all-time Oregon quarterback play, I'd have him behind Dixon. I mean, you'd probably say Joey Harrington as well. But again, I'm just going off guys that I've watched extensively, which has been a while now, but certainly not as long as a lot of you out there. I'd have him behind Mariota and Bo and Dennis Dixon and Herbert, and that's probably it. And then I have him tied with Darren Thomas, who I've always been a huge fan of. So I like that question. Always down to give DG some love because he was awesome this year. Dylan sending this question. I think we are a Seton transfer away from winning the Natty. Said the same about Downs last year. Well, Dylan, you got two things wrong here. First of all, the player referring to, Jordan Seton, who's a 5-star offensive tackle, went to Colorado, started as a true freshman this past year. He is not going to be leaving Colorado, at least not that I have heard. And I also don't think Oregon would be a candidate if he were to leave the Buffs. Secondly, I don't think that's the missing piece from Oregon here. Now, maybe that's because I don't have, national championship expectations for Oregon in 2025. I expect them to make the playoff. I want them to prove me wrong. I just don't expect them to be at that level as I did coming into this 2024 season. But one thing to note about, the transfer portal high school player discussion that rages amongst fans, particularly online all the time, is sometimes you are that one right player away from getting where you need to go. There was this press conference clip going around from Ryan Day back when he was told, he was in the middle of a press conference, and then he was told that they got a commitment from this guy named Jeremiah Smith. And he reacted in this way where he was trying to keep his cool, essentially. But he knew. He knew what they had just gotten. And yeah, that guy's a monster. We all saw that. And he just made the play to help Ohio State clinch the national championship. Sometimes you are one player away. What's the biggest complaint Oregon fans fairly had after the Rose Bowl and the season writ large when looking at Oregon's defense? Feels like they have to be better and more productive at the safety position. A guy that Oregon was after in the transfer portal cycle last year was Andrew Makuba, the transfer from Clemson. I don't know if you watched him play for Texas at all this year, but that Texas defense for a long time, and I just discussed this for a while on Locked On College Football, was one of the most underrated units in the country, and then everyone came around to realize, hey, I think this Texas defense is really good. Andrew Makuba was the player that Oregon was one addition away from being at least a lot closer to where they needed to be. No question in my mind, he would have started over either Kobe Savage or Tyshim Johnson this past year and made a significant difference on the back end of Oregon's defense. He can tackle, he flies downhill, he is rangy, he's got ball skills. Like he is the exact type of safety that I'm looking for Oregon to find, whether it's in the portal with Thieneman or the transfer from Purdue or one of the young guys like McNutt or Offord or any one of these guys that, Oregon have recruited in the last couple cycles. He is the embodiment of what I want Oregon to be able to find at the safety position. So sometimes, yeah, you are kind of one player away. I mean, Ohio State didn't add a whole lot of transfers to this year's team. They had a bunch of returners from last year's squad, but guess what? Adding Caleb Downs, boy, that made a heck of a difference, didn't it? That defense is really, really good, the best in college football, and Caleb Downs is a big reason why. So you can be one player away from taking a significant step forward at a non-quarterback position. You just don't always know who that guy is until you have all the data after the season. So I see where your head's at. I understand. But no, Oregon's not a Jordan Seaton transfer away from a national championship. Maybe a few other players. You never know. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.